All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about a massive change to Maryland law that happened really overnight. On October 1st, 2023, the state completely rewrote the rules for divorce, and it affects thousands and thousands of people. So, what got thrown out, and what's the new normal? Think about those classic, really dramatic reasons for divorce you see in old black and white movies. Words like adultery, desertion, cruelty. For decades, here in Maryland, that wasn't just drama. That was the actual legal basis you needed to end a marriage. But as of October 1st, 2023, they're gone. Just completely wiped from the books. The state has made a fundamental shift, moving away from a system that was all about blaming somebody to one that just acknowledges a marriage is over. To really wrap your head around just how big this change is, we've got to first look at the old way of doing things, the complicated and frankly often nasty system that just got repealed. So first up, there used to be this thing called a limited divorce. It was basically a court-ordered separation. A judge could step in, rule on things like desertion, and order financial support. But here's the kicker. It didn't actually end the marriage. You were still legally married. You could not remarry. That entire idea, that whole category of divorce, it's gone. The new law completely does away with limited divorces. That concept no longer exists in Maryland, period. Now, for a final divorce, what they called an absolute divorce, you had to prove one of these things. And just think about the difficulty and the expense of trying to gather evidence for something like cruelty or adultery. Even the so-called no-fault option meant you had to live in totally separate homes for a full year. It was a long, expensive, and just emotionally draining process for so many people. So, what's taken its place? Well, the new law gives us a much more streamlined, no-fault system. The whole focus is no longer on why the marriage fell apart, but simply on the fact that it's over. And look at this. The change is just so stark. On the left, you see that long, messy list of fault-based reasons we just talked about. And on the right, the new reality. Just a handful of simple, direct, no-fault paths. The entire system has been boiled down to make the process way more straightforward. So let's break down the new ways you can get a divorce here. You've basically got three main roads to take now. A 6-month separation, this new idea called irreconcilable differences, and a rule for sad situations involving permanent legal incapacity. This irreconcilable differences thing, it's a total game changer. It means one person can file for divorce just by saying the marriage is broken and can't be fixed. That's it. You don't need to get the other person to agree. You don't need to prove they did something wrong. It just lets an individual move on when they know the relationship is truly over. Okay, let's get into what is probably the single biggest practical change for Marylanders, because the new law completely redefines what it even means to be separated. First, the timeline. The waiting period to get a divorce has been cut in half. It's gone from 12 long months down to just 6. That dramatically speeds up the whole process, letting people formally end their marriage and start moving on with their lives much faster. But here it is. This is the biggest practical shift, and I'm going to read this right from the new law itself. Parties shall be deemed to have lived separate and apart, even if the parties reside under the same roof. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Before, separation meant someone had to pack up and move out, which, costs a fortune. Now, a couple can be legally separated while still living in the same house as long as they're pursuing separate lives. It's a huge deal. Now, with all this change, you might be wondering, did they keep anything from the old system? And the answer is yes. Lawmakers kept one really important path to divorce that was already working well: mutual consent. This option is still the best way to go for couples who can actually work together. Basically, if the two of you can sit down and create a written settlement agreement that covers everything, property, alimony, child support, the whole shebang, then you can file for divorce using mutual consent. It's the fastest and usually the most peaceful route, and lawmakers were smart to keep it. So let's put it all together. This table really just captures the massive shift. We've gone from a system that often required you to prove fault to one that is purely no fault. The separation period is slashed from 12 months to 6. You can now separate while living in the same house, and that confusing limited divorce is completely gone. It's a clear move toward a simpler, faster, and less confrontational process. Ultimately, when you step back, this new law is all about cutting down the financial and emotional damage of ending a marriage. It treats it less like some kind of moral failure and more like a straightforward legal process. And that leaves us with a pretty big question. By making divorce less of a battle, has Maryland just created a blueprint for the future of family law everywhere? That's The Explainer. Thanks for joining us.